We're going to talk a little bit about horses or tanks, the power of focusing on the future. So the question here is, would you rather go into combat riding a horse in the cavalry or in a tank?
Tank.
So when we're looking at our focus, I have another question for you, and we'll come back to those guys. But you know, many of us have, you've kind of in a position where you've done the right things. You've gotten good grades. You went to college and grad school. You worked hard. You followed all the rules. And my question to you is, are you where you were hoping you would be at this point? Very often, despite all that, despite following the program, doing the things that we're told we're meant to do, we don't always get to where we hoped we would be, or where we hope we're going. So at this stage, especially given the current context and all, where's your focus? Is your focus in the rearview mirror? Or are you focused on what's next and the future? So General Hare, when I first told this, someone challenged me and went back and said, no, it's World War I, not World War II. General Hare was the head of the United States Cavalry, and in 1938 was still advocating for horses over machine and mechanized units. In 1940, he was still saying he would not give up another horse or officer for another tank. Meanwhile, so he was holding on tightly onto the past, right? Even in the face of evidence that the future was changing. So during World War II, technology was advancing at a very rapid rate, and old forms of fighting were being displaced by newer technologies. This is the 2nd Armored Division. They, when we entered the war, went into Northern Africa and then had success in Sicily. And this is them staging for the invasion of Normandy in 1944. So D-Day was June 6, 1944, landed on the beaches. 3 days later, the 2nd Armored Division landed at Omaha Beach in Normandy. The significance here is my grandfather entered West Point in 1937 as a cavalry cadet. Okay, his first commission after graduation and his first promotion as a 1st and 2nd lieutenant both list him under cavalry. He was here on the Salisbury Plain where they staged, and I know that because I went there with him when I was about 15, and he showed me where they staged all the tanks and machinery so that the Nazi armies couldn't see them when they were flying, or the Air Force couldn't see them when they were flying over, so that where they hid the tanks in the forest, where they built kind of coverings to look like forest and mimic. So, because this took several months to get everybody there and get everything organized and ready for the invasion of Normandy. And then, of course, we know the story that follows from there, but I will come back to that in a little bit. So most people are kind of caught in the past like General Hare, and they're caught in the chaos of the rapid change and the day-to-day. We're caught in our distractions, okay, both interruptions and the things we do to distract ourselves. You know, we're looking on our phones, we're getting that dopamine shot, we're doing, you know, other things to entertain ourselves. And we're ultimately seeking safety and comfort and security. These things have to be satisfied before we can move into meaning, before we can move beyond. But the reason I'm using this picture is the fish is the last one to see water. When we're in the middle of it, we don't even know that we're there. It's normal for us. But you know, it doesn't take a very astute observer down here to be looking at the whale shark and realize that, you know, he's in the middle of an aquarium. So another question for you is, are you busy? Okay, and our culture glorifies busyness. If we aren't that person, we know someone who's always busy. And we tend to conflate that many times with importance. And I love the idea, the story that the ants are busy, and we're also experts at being busy. But what are you busy about? And really asking yourself that question, I think, can start to slow things down. So we keep ourselves busy in the cycle, busy with this cycle of distractions, consumption, and ultimately overwhelmed. Very often we go home, we're tired, it's Friday, we're thankful to get out, versus being super excited about what's going to come next. So we opt for the short-term reward, we chase the shiny object, we just kind of keep ourselves occupied. And we look at this guy, if he lets up on his focus, if he doesn't stay focused and forward, he's going to get swamped by what's behind him, by all the things that are coming. And very often we can kind of feel this way too. But it's super important that he focuses forward so the wave doesn't catch up and get him. So I want to share with you a couple stories about these companies, because these are companies that ultimately didn't focus forward. Okay, Kodak, as late as 2012, were still insisting that they were a film company. Okay, I know that because Jeffrey Hazlett, their CMO, came to San Francisco and gave a talk. He's a chief marketing officer who had just left the company and was expressing his incredible frustration because he was running around probably yelling and screaming that we are a memories company. This is a stage where Kodak was making digital video cameras, they were making printers, they're making all kinds of other things, but the leadership was still stuck on film. Okay, when's the last time you bought film? Right? So Kodak still exists, by the way. Okay, a couple of these companies still exist, but they're a shadow of their former selves. Research in Motion, they were the makers of Blackberry. When their executives saw the unveiling of the iPhone in 2007, they were impressed. They were impressed by the browser and by all the things that Apple got into the iPhone, but they were also, there were co-CEOs at the time, and one of the founders was one of the co-CEOs, and he went and talked to the other one, and he was a little bit freaking out, a little bit worried, but what they determined was, you know what, the battery life stinks, the keyboard on the iPhone is not good, they don't have the security issues that our business customers need, and one of them literally said to the other, it's okay, we'll be fine. Now that was a point in time where they were number one in the market. So what do they have to worry about? Now, with the advantage of hindsight, what do you guys know about what happened to Blackberry? You're welcome to unmute too and comment. But go ahead.
Nobody uses Blackberry anymore.
Yeah, I mean, they still exist, right? The
Yeah.
company's still there. They're still trying to do some things, but yeah, the ubiquity of the iPhone and even the competing Android devices, you know, Blackberry had the resources. They had the money, they had the engineers, they had everything they needed to make a pivot, to make something that competed with the iPhone, to make something that could compete with the iPad. And they deliberately chose not to, right? So Blockbuster's, go ahead.
Oh, nothing, sorry.
No, okay, no worries. So Blockbuster, you know, similarly with Netflix, right? Blockbuster had the opportunity to reinvent themselves. They had the customer base, they had the mailing list, they had all that. I won't go into all the stories here, but you can relate to each one of these. Likewise, there's another half dozen, right? Nokia still exists, Xerox still exists, Palm still exists, but there are shadows of their former selves. Okay, and these are companies or organizations that are going to need to adapt. Okay, they're going to need to figure out what their future looks like. And you know, they're kind of stuck in the past, or they have a target market. Uber is a great example. They were kind of betting the long game on self-driving cars and ultimately not having to hire people and pay individuals, pay people along the way. So all the way so far, Uber's really been subsidized by the investors. When we take one of their cars, their rides, including, and Lyft is the same way, we're being subsidized. We're not paying full fare. But their play was that if we can get rid of the drivers and use the cars, then we can keep the fares as they are. We've gotten people used to this, and this obviously has been completely upended by the COVID pandemic. Casinos, you know, this is Caesar's Palace, but this applies to pretty much all of them. It's gaming and hotels and restaurants and nightclubs and malls and all wrapped into one. And with the current, environment and situation, all of those businesses are individually at risk, much less if you try to bring them all together. So they're going to have to figure out ways to look at the future and think about how they're going to adapt. The same is true for these other companies and organizations. They've got to start looking forward. So in the PT world, in the physio world, we get people kind of pushing back on that and saying, well, the relationships can't, be maintained if we're not seeing people in person, if we're not touching them. Patients expect that. That's kind of some of the stuff I heard. Now, if you're not familiar with Physera, Physera is a company that I was fortunate enough to work with and advise back in 2017. Physera decided to approach physio and musculoskeletal treatment from a different perspective. So what they did was they created a network of therapists, an online platform, and they approached companies to say, hey, instead of waiting until your person is really desperate and needs help and goes to the doctor and goes through the whole regular medical channels, why don't we put them in touch with an on-demand, online physical therapist 15-minute triage visit at the beginning of any pain or problem? Okay, and they went to companies that were self-funded, self-insured, so that the distinction between workers' comp and the other didn't really matter because it's all coming out of the same bucket. Okay, it's all coming out of the company's bank account. So they started doing that. They then, that visit, so you could, if I started having neck pain today, this afternoon, I could contact a PT, have a virtual 15-minute visit, and the therapist would either, give me some advice so I could correct it or set up my laptop differently or whatever, give me a couple exercises perhaps, get me onto an automatic or automated home exercise program, set me up for telehealth visits with them for a couple times to make sure we're on track or get better, or refer to a brick and mortar PT or other specialists because there might have been somebody who's a surgical candidate or otherwise. But by doing this, and only starting about 4 years ago, Physera grew. They certainly weren't making $30 million, but the valuation, because of the new approach and the way they were doing it, they sold the company in May for $30 million. Think about where your company was 3 years ago and what somebody might pay for it today. So it's time to look forward. It's time to start approaching new territories, not with old maps, but with new maps, starting to test and look at what we're doing in an objective reality. So the future is going to be different from the past. Those who survive are frequently not the strongest, but they're the most adaptable. And our objective, especially at this moment in time, is to look forward, not backwards, not try to necessarily return to what we had. So I want you to avoid navigating that new territory with the old maps and start drafting and figuring out what the new maps look like. We have an opportunity, you have an opportunity to reimagine and reinvent your future and your business. So that's what we're going to begin on today. You'll begin to draw some new maps and think about that and start to think about your new and reimagined future. Okay, so remember our busyness. It's really easy when we're busy to get stuck over on the right-hand side. Okay, General Hair was a preservator. He, just like the businesses like Kodak and Blockbuster and Blackberry and the rest, he was not comfortable with the changes and uncertainty of the future. And the irony is, by refusing to take those risks on the new technology and ways of doing things, he was actually advocating for a far riskier course. So are you focused on keeping order in what was, or are you looking forward and figuring out what will be and how you and your company will fit into that? So one thing, I like this question, when you get stuck in the chaos or you're feeling overwhelmed or you're feeling like you're not doing, don't have the bandwidth, the space to really start to be creative and think about the future, ask yourself this question: is what I'm doing right now going to matter to anybody in 5 years? Okay, again, the irony is these companies and their leaders thought they were mitigating and decreasing risk by not embracing the change, by not adapting to the changing environment. And instead they put their organizations, their companies at greater risk. Right, so I want to switch to the individual. Okay, these are the 5 levels of focus forward development, and we're going to start at the bottom. And the reason is most of us actually literally started at the bottom, right? We started level 1 in our first jobs and sometimes in later jobs. We're an individual contributor. So we do the things, whether that's paying the bills or mopping the floors or treating patients or flipping burgers or whatever. The individual contributor has a job and they do things and they make the customers happy. Level 2 requires a different skill set. So as a level 1, very often a lot of people will aspire to level 2, but they don't train for not just the new skills, but the new perspective on their role and who they are. Okay, so level 2 is not there to do the things, they're there to ensure that things get done. And in doing so, they support the level 1 people and provide them the resources, the skills, the training, the wherewithal to make sure that they're doing them. Now, level 3, we read about level 3, but usually in articles written by, written by reporters and writers who are at level 1. So where do we get trained for level 3? These are the people starting to work on strategy, that are leading the organization, that are deciding what the things are that get done. Now they need to ensure a focus and alignment, but you know, we go out and we work and we get some on-the-job training, maybe a little bit, and a few weekend workshops and conferences, but we don't really have, at least in the medical world, we don't have a lot of professional development and training that helps us shift our focus and shift our lens and reimagine our own roles and selves. Now, before we keep going, I want to bring up the idea here too, that there isn't rigidity here, yet there's fluidity. So as we go and talk about the owner, the founder, whose job is really to build and inspire the team, build the company, inspire the team, that person may be an individual contributor today, at least for an hour or two. Okay, there's nothing wrong with an owner or founder working in the business part of the time. And there's nothing wrong with them being a manager part of the time and working on strategy part of the time. There's a fluidity here. They're going to move around within each of these. The reason for showing this and creating the structure is to do that with intent. Okay, not to be caught up as an individual contributor when you're meant to be inspiring the team. Not to ignore management because you just need to intervene and do things. Okay, so we need to have a plan and work both on our own viewpoints, our own lens of where we're meant to be, and then be deliberate about where we are in any given moment. And really challenge ourselves and ask those questions too. Am I in the right role? Am I wearing the right hat right now for the benefit of the company? When we get comfortable with that, and there are a lot of owners, founders who have difficulty, seeing themselves as a manager, seeing themselves as a strategist, really taking on that inspiring and building role. So number one, they have to kind of get used to that and start to re-envision and reimagine. Same thing's true, by the way, with people that you want to move into management roles and leadership roles within the organization. But once that's kind of established, and as we're starting to envision the future and reinvent, that's when we get into level 5, is what I'm calling the creativator. Okay, we're envisioning what could be, creating what doesn't yet exist. We can't live there all the time. We've got to move through some of the different levels just to get things done each day. But this is the area where you get to really step back and reinvent the future.
That's
Now,
a great name. I want to be a creativator.
okay, excellent, excellent. Well, that's the hope, right? We may not be there all the time, and it's hard. That's the other thing. When we're talking about people who are operators that, like therapists, attorneys, physicians, people who hang up a shingle and business kind of comes to them and they get to do stuff and consult and get paid right away. When you're getting into creation and creating what doesn't exist yet, that takes time and effort, and there's not an immediate payoff. You don't necessarily know if you're doing it right. Okay, so that's a struggle sometimes, and something that people have to get used to. But the cool thing about this is you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Stuff like this has been done before. There are people who can help, a number of people who can help. But what we want to do is make sure that you have the wherewithal, you have the resources, you have the, not just the desire, but the framework, the scaffolding to start to be able to do this, to notch some wins, to build upon that and really grow yourself as well as your business. Sorry, so the one other item here, when I first started down this path and creating this, I was really focused on the leaders and the founders and those folks getting stuck in the preservator side, okay, preserving the status quo. But really digging in, drilling down, this can happen at any level. I mean, this is the front desk person who doesn't want to do a new way of answering the phone, right? Or doesn't want to implement the new phone system or something. That we're holding on to the status quo and defending it in many cases, largely because that's what we're used to. Okay, we're not being objective and thinking about what would work best and are there changes needed. And we don't want change for the sake of change, okay? That's not what we're about. But if we have an idea, think there might be something that works better, what we can do is we can test those two things side by side. We can prove or disprove that it actually works better. We can be inventive and try it and test it out and then figure out whether in fact it is. If it is, if we get an improvement in efficiency, we get an improvement in performance, then we want to roll that out to everybody. We want to make that the new status quo. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Cool. So now let's look a little bit at what's happening in the world, right? Why we should be focusing forward now more than ever. First off, there's simply technology, right? Chips are, and efficiencies are getting faster and faster and faster. And you know, this is happening at an increasingly rapid rate. There's virtual reality. There's the fact that in many cases, a lot of people can now work from anywhere. Our mobility's been dramatically affected. You know, I don't have to live in the city to do the things that I want to do. COVID has obviously sped all of this up. And, you know, so I saw a post last week, it was probably Thursday, and they said 6 years ago on Monday, you know, and that's kind of what it feels like sometimes. The pace of change is happening so quickly. COVID has sped things up, but it's not things that wouldn't have happened in many cases otherwise. The big difference is, you know, even in January, February, working with clients, we were looking at, you know, changes happening over the course of the next 15 to 20 years. And slow adaptation and adoption of these new methods, new changes, new technologies, and all this. And what we've kind of been forced into with some of the changes is all that stuff's been accelerated, maybe tenfold. We're now condensing down into months or maybe a year or two what was going to happen over the next decade or two. I've got this down here on the bottom right because I wanted to call out, I hear from particularly people in the rehab world and medical that, well, yeah, but a lot of this doesn't apply to us. You know, we're hands-on, we're unique, we're different. People demand that and need it. What you're looking at down there is surgical devices. Now, this is a practice session. It's not quite ready for prime time yet, but it's coming. Okay, those are force feedback devices so that the surgeon can feel the tissue. They can operate the camera, feel the tools, and literally get feedback when the device pushes back against resistance and what have you. Okay, so this is going to be where somebody, a surgeon in San Francisco, could do a surgery in Afghanistan, and then a surgery in Berlin, and then a surgery in DC, and then a surgery in San Francisco, potentially all in the same day. So think about that a little bit as we think about, oh, the sanctity of what we do maybe as physios or as therapists. Our hands-on can't be replaced. It very well might be. Might be a little bit longer down the road, but it is a potential. We add on to that, you know, machine learning, which is accelerating, artificial intelligence, which is, again, accelerating exponentially, cryptocurrencies. We've got all these changes. Machines are getting smarter, currencies are evolving, jobs are being replaced and displaced at an increasingly rapid rate. So why don't people break through? Why don't they embrace change? I learned this from my friend Doug Glue, who has a doctorate in psychology, but we've been talking quite a bit, and what he explained was that we had an evolutionary interest in not embracing change. Okay, think about that. With the first person to try the new red berry may not be here tomorrow. Okay, the first guy that tried the new mountain pass might not have their fingers tomorrow, or might get attacked by the saber-toothed tiger. Okay, we tended to do what was safe because it had already been done, and we did that simply to survive. So we stuck to the status quo. Now, we're still governed by those same feelings around change. So even when the stakes are much, much lower and we're not literally at risk of dying, even when the stakes might be as low as embarrassment or really not much of anything at all, we're still hanging on to the same feelings that evolved in us to prevent us from changing. So yeah, there's resistance to change. You know, we mentioned that earlier, and it's a big deal, and it's really ingrained in us. Doug would say it's in our firmware. So being aware of that can help us, but having a process can help us provide some structure and security and allow us to deal with and manage those feelings that are keeping us from changing. And knowing and understanding is a good first step, but knowing it by itself is not enough. Okay, if knowing was enough, if reading the book was enough, then everyone would be a champion. So we have to do. Okay, having someone who's been down the road before is a great way to adopt and adapt to the changes that you want, but ultimately we have to do. Okay, so step one, feel comforted. There is a process. So step one is to shore up your business, shore up what you currently have, so that you can start to free up your time. You create processes, you go down this road. You're not the first one to travel this road. Okay, you identify, you organize, you prioritize, you delegate where you can, you create a process for delegation so that things don't get dropped, but you start with baby steps. Start with 3 small things that you need to do, and that'll be used in an ongoing way that may matter, at least in 6 months or a year, and hopefully in 5 years. But you start with those things, notch a few wins, begin to build some structure around the things that you do, so you're not the source of all truth. But be a little bit patient and compassionate toward yourself as well, and when you start taking these small steps. So that will allow you to create some of the space, some of the mind space that you need. After you create that space that you need to think, that time, you can begin to envision what doesn't yet exist. And that's really step 2. We start to think about those things. And there are a lot of people who don't think, because thinking is hard. It's a little bit scary. We're not quite sure. We don't have the structure. So we want to go ahead and give ourselves the time and the space to do that. Number one, by getting control of what's going on currently, but then giving ourselves the time and space to really start thinking and envisioning what could be. And then step 3 is to take action. You're going to do. Again, knowing is not enough. Will and short-term inspiration is not enough. Okay, we need a structure and a few wins to start building, and consider that. Think about that when you're managing people, when you're working with your staff. Give them a few things that they can do that succeed, because then they're going to want to do more. So this isn't a just do it. This is being deliberate and intentional with your actions, starting small and building on that. Okay, so now we're going to get into the 12 focus forward pillars. So how and what we do to, well, really the question is how and what do we build in our businesses? So again, we're going to identify, organize, and prioritize. We don't more distractions. We don't want more distractions, rather, and overwhelm. We want focus. Again, we want to start small. These pillars are really designed to be taken on 1 a month, so that you can get through them, build them, make those decisions, build the infrastructure, and then move on to the next one. So we want to log a few wins. We want to build up our get stuff done muscle. And as you do that, you may be able to accelerate and go a little faster over time. But we got to first build what you build first will create the foundations for the next things that you build. So it's important that we keep moving forward. So these are the 12 pillars. We're going to go through each one of them, and feel free, especially as we get into the kind of the nuts and bolts and roll our sleeves up here, to stop, ask questions. Let's drill down a little bit on these. Okay. 8 of these are really focused on shoring up what you have, of dialing things in and getting the efficiencies that in your current business. Not looking to abandon what you already have. Okay, that reinventing the future doesn't mean burning our bridges and burning the boats at the shore. It means making sure that everything operates well, so we have the space to work on the other 4, which are really focused on building your future. The first one is a build your playbook. Okay, great teams, and the first time I ever heard this, Jack Daly said this. He wrote the sales playbook, and great person to look up and to listen to and watch. But what Jack said to a group of 80 entrepreneurs was, most sports teams are run better than most businesses because of 2 things. And the 2 things are, they have a playbook and they practice. So his question to us was, how many of you already have a playbook? And he does a lot of sales coaching and consulting. And when people ask him to help them improve their sales process, the first thing he asks for is their playbook, because he wants to know what they're already doing. He shared with us that 2% of the people that ask for help have a playbook. So he sends the other 98 back to the drawing board and says, look, you got to start writing down what you already have. Okay, and that's the good news. Many of your plays already exist. It's just that they're likely in your head, or they're in somebody else's head in your organization. So what we want to do is start getting those things out of your head. Okay, and it can be as simple as, how do we answer the phone, right? Start writing them down. Once you've written these plays down, you've got a list, you can then put them. This will help you create order, structure, and communicate better with all of your players. So one idea is, we can take those plays that apply to our front desk, or apply to billing, or apply to accounts payable, and organize them by role. Okay, if you consider or think about this in the context of like a football team, we're not going to go over defensive line positions and plays during with special teams players. We're going to focus on the plays that they actually are responsible for and do. This is a great way to score a real and significant early win as well. So you start writing down and organizing the things that you have in your head. You start sitting down with and pulling them out of your different team members, your different players. You get them written down. You then can use this for a couple different things. One is, you can assess and look at it and agree that, yes, this is the way, or you can make changes and adjustments. You can get multiple people. So let's say you have 4 locations. You make sure that all 4 locations and all 8 people answering the phone are doing it the same way. If somebody has a better play, a better way of doing it, then that's the way we're going to roll it out and do it. Okay. This also makes bringing on new employees much, much easier, because now we have a structure and a framework to help train them. We're not just relying on institutional memory. We've literally written it down. They can review it and study it. We can have the conversation. We can practice it. We can make sure that they're doing it. And we're going to come back to practice a little bit later. Any questions or comments so far?
Nope. Sounds good to me.
Okay.
I have one on,
Sure.
and this, you may be going to touch base on this, but
Mhm.
how do you help your employees understand when you're, for example, the example you gave on how writing down how they're going to answer the phone, and how do you get them to be okay with that type of a conversation and not feel like they are being insulted and micromanaged?
Sure. If you have multiple locations and multiple people, or you can use the training, analogy as well, we're going to hire a new person. Do we have a best practice that we use to answer the phone? I mean, their
Okay.
answer would probably be yes, right? So what's the best way to teach somebody else, someone new, to do that? And just like this, we're using visual, we'll be using written, we use verbal, multiple modalities, multiple channels, repetition. But having someone, if everything is kind of, word of mouth institutional memory, then when they sit down and train that person, number one, we're relying entirely on the individual doing the training, and we're relying on their memory. Okay.
Yes.
You're also throwing a whole bunch of other stuff at them, right? A new employee, a new trainee.
Right.
So how do we create basically a guidebook that makes this a little bit simpler? That your point's very well taken, because surgeons, right? Checklists were introduced into surgeries, right?
Right.
Well, and what was the initial response? I don't need no stinking checklist.
Right.
Right. I mean, so the initial response was, I'm a surgeon, I'm smart, I don't need that. Okay, so what they did was, and I think it was Mayo Clinic or Cleveland that were kind of starting this, what they were trying to do was reduce the amount of infections, reduce the number of, not that there were a lot of them, but were the instruments and sponges and things that were left in people as they closed them up.
Right.
Right. So the doctors were like, no, we don't need that. I don't need that. That's below me. You're micromanaging me. Same kind of argument. So what they did was they went back and said, well, hang on, who else is a high level, performer that also uses a checklist? You know who they thought of?
Ooh.
Commercial pilots.
Oh.
So they went back to the surgeons and said, hey, you know who else uses checklists? Commercial pilots. Would you like to be on an airplane where the pilot said, nah, I don't need that. I'm just going to wing it. I'm good. I'm smart. I know what's going on.
Good point.
Right?
Good point.
So it was really shocking, surprising how quickly, after making that argument and that illustration, they got adoption from the surgeons. Like, number one, you're not shaming them. You're giving them some kind of framework. Number two, you're making it personal of, the pilot's smart. He's been doing this 25 years. He doesn't need a checklist. Do you want to be on that plane? Do they ever get interrupted or distracted? Does that ever happen to you in surgery? Does anything ever go wrong? Anything ever a hiccup? You ever get interrupted? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to do this? And then they had really good success and were able to show with evidence that, hey, this works, this is great. And then they, that expanded out from the organizations that began it into so many other organizations. And if you think about it today, if you ask your surgeon, let's say you're going in for a rotator cuff repair, and you talk to 3 different surgeons, and one of them uses a checklist, and the other 2 say, I don't need that, who would you choose?
The checklist.
Yeah. I don't care if you've been doing it for 40 years. You got nurses in there, you got anesthesiologists, you got other people. Yeah, I'm sure you're technically really good, but I mean, I walked out of the house without my mask the other day and went, I got to go back and get it. Okay.
That's
right?
a great point.
So, yeah, I mean, having that run through and that checklist can be really, really useful. Having this playbook and something written and documented and kind of codified as the way we do it here. It builds consistency across the organization. So we have a way that we answer the phone. We have one way. We don't have 17 different ways, depending upon our moods and how, the 8 different people doing it. We have a way that we do it. And the reason we do that is because we get the results that we want. Now, what happens if you still get pushback? Okay.
You get frustrated.
Sure. Well, we'll save that for pillar 11 because that's coming up. All right.
Okay.
All right. So great question though. Excellent question, actually. So pillar number 2, this is defining your vision, and this is really creating a vision of meaning. And there's so many, as I'm building out this module and stuff, there's so many reasons for this, but you create you define rather, or discover, or go back and get connected with your higher purpose. In other words, the reason the company exists. Why does it even exist on the face of the earth to begin with? Okay, we develop the core values. Core values are the rules, the behaviors of how we do things around here, the rules that we live by. The big ambitious goal is where you want to end up in the next like 8 to 10 years or so. Okay, so these three things together establish the meaning, the how, the behaviors, and the where, the destination of where we're going. I remember working with a client a few years ago where we brought this up and they're like, oh yeah, we did this. I'm like, okay, great. What are they? Oh, I have to go find it. I'm like, okay, how do you use them? What do you mean? Well, I mean, if you got to go pull them off a shelf somewhere and you don't use them, whether you went through the exercise or not, you haven't implemented them in your business. They're not alive. Okay. And these can serve so many different things. One of them is this is the beginning of your decision matrix. Okay. So one of the advanced pillars is decision matrices. This is number one. If someone comes to you and wants to sell you something, if a player, an employee comes to you with an idea for a new program, the very first set of questions you ask is, does it align with our vision? In other words, does it align with our higher purpose? Does it fit with our core values? And does it move us closer to our big ambitious goal? If the answer to any of those is no, you are done. Okay? It has to qualify here. And if it doesn't, then we're not going to do it. Another great way when we get to pillar 12 in recruiting and hiring A players and championship players is the core values actually dictate what your first interview is. Your first interview, all the questions give you insight into how well aligned they are with your core values, and how well their behaviors are aligned, okay? Because it's going to be harder to find people who fit with that than people who have the skills that you want. So we use these, we make these come to life. These are literally, part and parcel of what we do every day. And the other piece of this, the other really super compelling reason is there have been a number of studies and reviews and tracking of companies with visions of meaning, purpose-driven, values-driven organizations. One of them, one of the studies, and I can get you guys the references, but studies show that 96% of companies who are purpose-driven, values-driven outperform their competition, and it's not culturally specific. That was across 17 different countries. Okay, a different study, retrospective, was that purpose-driven, values-driven organizations outperformed their counterparts in stock price by 12x. Okay. We get caught up, or we read about and we watch these big kind of publicly traded companies and what have you, who are basically chasing quarterly earnings. All their incentive structures are set up for the near term. This is not a near term strategy. Okay, you're gonna say no to things that might make you money next month, but you're building for the long term. And when you do that consistently, your long-term performance completely outpaces the competition. Okay, so there is a very, very compelling reason to do this. And part of the reason that works is it gives your entire team kind of a North Star. It gives them direction, structure, consistency, and an inspiring sense of purpose so they know what they're working for. So if you guys have anything, please interject. Otherwise, I'll keep moving through the pillars. Okay, so go ahead.
I was just saying, so far so good. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. So pillar 3 is setting a budget. Okay, and that was, oh my goodness, that was one of the most boring ideas in the world for me early on. but what we want to do is begin with your profit. Okay, a profit first budget. And when I ask, like I'm doing trainings or talks and stuff, you know, in front of audiences and ask them, what is profit? Because first off, we have to agree on the definition. Most of the time what I hear is profit is what's left over. And I want to tell you, that's the wrong way to think about it, okay? I want to get you out of that mindset. Profit is not what's left over, okay? And that idea, that part of the reason I'm passionate about that is that really held me up for a number of years. Profit instead is where you start, okay? We're going to look at your business. We're going to design new things with the profit first. And what I mean, if you want safety, security, comfort, it's much, much easier and more productive to start with your profit. Then, and this was a lesson I learned the hard way, but Greg Crabtree teaches this. He's an accountant. He works with he's been doing this for 20 years, and he also wrote the book, Simple Numbers. Let me see, I've got it right here. Simple Numbers, Straight Talk, Big Profits. Highly recommend it. But when I read it a couple of years ago, I kept going through going, oh my gosh, I wish I'd had this book 20 years earlier. So much of it was true. So much of it I kind of knew it at that point, but I had definitely gone about it the hard way instead of learning those lessons early on. But anyway, the profit minus overhead is what you're left with for your personnel. Okay, and that's kind of a validation test in our business design. But if you've got an existing business, you know what your overhead is. If you set your goals for your profit at whatever they are, you have your profit, your overhead, you take those out of your gross revenue, and now you have your salary cap. Now, the way Greg approaches that is he starts with the NFL and talks about, you know, if you spend more money on a running back, you have less money to spend on other players. If you spend more money on your left tackle, you have less money to spend on your tight end. So they're trade-offs because there's a finite amount of money in the bucket for player salaries. The same thing is true of our businesses. Because if you know what your overhead is and you've done everything you can to make that efficient, and overhead is going to be your rent, your utilities, all your fixed expenses, all the stuff that you're going to pay for regardless of whether you have 3 people or 10 people working there and what have you, okay? Your personnel expenses are everything else. So if you take your profit out of your gross revenue and then you take your overhead out, you now have a percentage that you have available for personnel. Does that make sense? So we want to look at that, and we also really want to look at that as we start maybe looking to the future and creating anything new. Fourth pillar, pillar 4, is your target customer. So kind of like why your business exists in the first place, this is defining who your business serves. Okay, who do we exist to serve? What do they like? Okay, because everything you do will revolve around this target customer. And actually, before I go into the definition of this, the concept here is that we're going to delight the few to attract the many. Okay, we have to have a very clear picture of who they are, though. And I am a big proponent of moving away from kind of the traditional demographic definition and model. So traditionally what people will do, and marketing people and others will do, is, you know, give you a 10-year age band, and they'll focus in on their gender and their income level and what car they drive and how many kids they have and all that. If you go ahead and kind of go through that exercise and make somebody like that up, does it tell you anything about their values and what they value, what they desire, their motivations, their psyche? You know, if you're going with a 40-year-old female with 2 kids who drives a Volvo, we might have a little bit of insight, but there's a whole lot of people who fit that description with very, very different attitudes. Okay, so what I'm looking for is, who's the person, what do they value? What do they want? What do they desire? What are their motivations? What are their behaviors? And you know, there might be some overlap with demographic, because if you think of the coaching business, my target customer is somebody with like between 5 and 100 employees. Okay. Beyond that, though, everything turns to attitude, behavior, you know, adaptation to change, coachability, willingness to learn new things, Are they a reader? Are they a learner? Are they a lifelong learner? It's all that kind of stuff. The cool thing about that is, and if you define this for your business, one of the things I think is so compelling and so cool about this is all those other things that people don't really control go away. So we're not hung up on their gender. We're not hung up on their orientation or their religion or their ethnicity or their age or all this other stuff where we kind of try to use to define people. But to me, it's much more important to have someone who is highly motivated, who's been through, you know, a little bit of the hard knocks, who's tried to hire people and succeeded or not, who understands where it is we're going next. And all that other stuff kind of fades away. It doesn't matter. Okay? But having a very clear picture of who that person is, that's going to allow us to do all the other things from here. So pillar 5, don't be a penguin. So what in the world do I mean by that? What do y'all think?
Don't look like everybody else.
Good. Yeah, that's step 1. Is it easy to tell the penguins apart?
Yeah.
Right. So if we're following the crowd, you know, how does anybody know where we're different? And even with that, too often, you know, the advice and all is to try to stand out from the crowd. I don't even want to stand out from the crowd. I want to leave the crowd. I want to stand apart from the crowd. Okay. There are lots of different ways to do that. Antagonism is one of my favorite. It's just kind of fun. You can think of Carl's Jr. and Hardee's as Super Size Me came out and McDonald's was trying to make a healthier menu and other fast food chains were trying to follow along. Well, McDonald's is doing it, so we should all do it. We're all going to do our own version. It's going to be a little different. We're going to try to stand out. Hardee's and Carl's Jr. went, oh man, no, we're not going healthy. You know, we're going to double down on the sauces and the meat, and you want to add 2 bacon and double mayonnaise and all that stuff? Yeah, you can. I mean, they knew full well that you're not going to eat that every day, or at least hope so. But when you want it, we got it. They went the entire other direction. And for them, it worked. You know, and part of your question, this is one of the things to write down here, is really ask yourself, because if you're not sure how you're going to stand apart, the first hint or clue about that is to go back to your target customers, go back to that person that you've described, and ask them, how are you dramatically and meaningfully different from their perspective? Why do they choose you? And I love that phrase, how are you dramatically and meaningfully different? And as you start to talk to them, and by the way, that's one of your huge unfair advantages over the big guys, over big companies and corporations, you can talk to these people directly. You don't have to hire researchers and do focus groups and invest hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. You can literally pick up the phone or go into the clinic and talk to people. Okay, why us? They will tell you. Okay, so what you want to do is then capitalize on that, accentuate that, exaggerate that, and figure out ways that you can be even more different. Okay, pillar 6. This is really around trends and opportunities. Okay, we're going to reimagine not just our business, we're really reimagining how in the future will we best serve and bring value to those target customers. Are there other things that they want? And when we go into this, you guys can check this out, but Ikigai, I-K-I-G-A-I, the Toronto Star has a diagram, a Venn diagram of the Ikigai concept. What you're looking at is, what do you love to do? So basically we go through this exercise. You make a list of what you love to do, what you're passionate about. You make a list of what you're good at. These are separate lists, okay? You make a list of what people will pay for. And then you make a list, and in the diagram it says what the world needs. We're not real concerned with what the world needs. We don't have enough time to solve all those problems. But what does your target customer desperately desire? And what everybody tries to do is they try to write a list initially of that center point. I don't want you to do that, okay? I want you to make a separate list of each one, but then look at where those things intersect, okay? And where they intersect and the things that are there in that intersection that you don't yet do, those are great opportunities to really double down on what you're doing for your target customer, offering them something else, offering them something different, and really still being in the zone or being in doing the things that you love to do, right? So in this process too, we look at how to scale those things using principles of mass customization and strategic partners. And what I mean by mass customization is that the general principles, kind of like these pillars, they are true for any business. The structure, the concept is something that your target customer needs. But how they're going to apply that in their life, in their context, in their organization, for themselves in their lives, that's where things are going to be customized. Okay? Strategic partners. When you list, as part of that exercise, all the things that your customer, your target customer, desperately desires, those things that you aren't good at, that you don't want to do, those are your potential strategic partners. Okay, people who do that. Because if they're bringing additional value to your target customer in areas that you have no intention of ever doing, so, think about my business, credit card processing. I'm never going to do credit card processing. Okay, billing, collections, I don't want to do that. Okay, EMR, no. But, bookkeeping, accounts payable, I don't want to do that. Okay, but those are all things that my target customer needs. So if I start to align with and ally with people who do those things, I can bring additional value to my target customer. I can also use and leverage them and bring value to their audience and get basically free marketing. Sound good?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Do you guys need to take a few minute break, or are we good to keep rolling?
I'm good.
Yep, same here.
All right, cool. So number 7, you're going to manage the right things, okay? And they're really only, I used to say 2 things you can manage, but they're actually 3. But we'll start with the first 2. And I'm going to tell you first what you cannot manage, okay? And part of the reason for that is I'm guilty of this. I used to go out, I literally did a talk of managing the metrics, okay, at the CSM, giant conference, right? You can't manage the metrics. What you can manage is the players, your people, and your playbook, the process. Okay, the third thing that you can manage is yourself. But these connect directly back to several of the other pillars and will help you build other, so we go back and look at 1, 2, 4, and 5. This connects directly back to those, and they also help you build 2 and 6, the ones we've done so far. So we manage people, we manage process, and we manage ourselves. The metrics, okay, these are the results. So what we want to do is we want to focus on the right metrics. We want to focus on the right results. And these are an indication of how well we managed the players and managed the process. So we bring focus to the most important metrics. Okay, we don't just look at the past and the rearview mirror. We also want to take these metrics and these results and start to project forward and plan and make corrections by using them. What I mean by that is we organize these into our lagging and leading indicators. So lagging indicators are something that is a result of things that we've done. Leading indicators are something that may be a result of something else we've done, but are going to determine what the next thing might be. An example of that might be our marketing activities. Marketing, as we get into that, the intent there is we generate leads. As we generate leads, that's a result of our marketing activity. But the number of leads we have is going to determine, based on our conversion rate, how many new patients we're going to have. Okay, or how many new customers, paying customers, we're going to have. So we'll get into that in just a second a little bit more, but that's an idea of a lagging and leading indicator. This will help you decide what actions to take. It will very much help you decide where to focus to move your numbers and get the results you want. So this will tell you where things may be working or maybe not working, and then you circle back to those people and the plays and the processes. So number 9, kind of dovetailing on the lagging leading indicators, number 9 is working on your sales and marketing processes. And I want to call out that these are 2 distinct and critically important processes. Okay, very often we say sales and marketing, people tend to lump them together. Marketing, the desired outcome from marketing is generating leads, okay? Generating interest in most kind of brick and mortar clinic settings to generate phone calls. Now those leads can come in via email or online scheduling or any number of ways, but the intent of the marketing is generate interest and generate action. Now sales, as you just mentioned, sales takes those leads and converts them into paying customers. Okay, that is a different process. In order for sales to work, in order for us to get the desired outcome from the sales pipeline, we have to have enough leads coming into the front of the pipeline. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so in both cases, you want to focus and create consistency and predictability as much as possible. Once you've done that, you can then start to test different things out and try to improve the process. But until you have these, you're tracking the right numbers and you have the ways, the plays, the ways that you do these things written down, it's going to be very hard to iterate and improve upon the process. Just adding more stuff, adding more channels, paying a marketing person or whatever, that may or may not be the solution. Okay, and we won't know that until we have the processes documented and know what numbers we're tracking to see if they're working. Okay, strategy and alignment. This is number 10. So we're getting close to the 12. But strategy is what goals you decide to focus on and how you choose to achieve them. So we use a planning process that's focused on your future outcomes and then work backwards to where you are today. So when you decide on your big, ambitious goal, we then go back and define your 3-year strategic moves, the goals that you want to do there. They need to be aligned with and move you toward your big, ambitious goal. We then define your 1-year strategic goals that'll move you toward your 3-year strategic moves. We then do a quarterly strategy meeting. It tends to get shorter and shorter the more you do it, but tend to start with about a half day. Bring in leadership, bring in the people that are critical to deciding direction and what have you. Really do a deep dive on what the status of the business is today, because we need to know, just like when you're working with a patient or working with someone, we need to know where we are now and where we're going. And when we do that, we can then define what the quarterly goals are and what those are. I caution you, you should not, this is one of the few times I will tell you what you should and shouldn't do. You should not have more than 3 of them, okay? I don't know why, but every time a group, company, organization adds a 4th quarterly strategic priority, none of them get done, okay? Or best case, 1 gets done, but it takes away. And what we want to do is create the process and the discipline to do 3 every quarter consistently, because the cool thing about that is when you get those things rolling and you do it, what you do today are the things you're going to use to build upon next time. And as you get 3 done this quarter and then that next quarter and then the next quarter, and you're doing 12 a year, especially since they're building on top of the things you've already accomplished, by the time you get 1, 2, 3 years down the road, you've achieved amazing things. But it takes that consistency and alignment, okay? And the reason I'm calling out alignment here as well is Harvard Business went in and looked at a bunch of companies that do strategic planning, okay, that have longer term goals and quarterly priorities and what have you. And 80%, okay, 80% of the companies that do this, the quarterly goals were not aligned with their longer term goals. Okay, so as the founder, as the owner, as the leader, you're the arbiter of this. This is something that, especially as your organization grows, you need to ensure that the things that you're working on, the big rocks, the important stuff that you're working on this quarter, are moving you closer to the 1-year, 3-year, and ultimate goals. Okay, that is a big part of your job. Now, in a smaller business, the main reason is not politics and self-interest and all that it is in a bigger organization. The main reason that they don't align is that we as owners and founders get distracted. We start chasing another opportunity. We kind of supplant what we decided we were going to do with the latest, greatest, newest thing. And then, things kind of fall apart. So don't get distracted by the shiny object. If you've got a bigger group and you're including people, make sure that they're not running their own personal agendas or personal, like, this is going to make my resume look better, or help me get a promotion or whatever, that you're really focused on what's the best thing for the team, the company to be working on together. When all these are aligned and work consistently, you really are primed to make amazing progress. Number 11, pillar 11, building a championship team. So a couple of questions for you. Do you have a team full of championship players right now? And if so, are you winning in the ways that you want to? Okay, so there's another way to look at it too. Are we achieving the things we want? What's getting in the way? But if you're not sure, or you're gonna kind of tell me, yeah, I got a total team of championship players, here's a question that you can ask. If you had to do it over again, would you enthusiastically rehire every member of your team? Okay, and I love when I'm doing kind of a day training and stuff, when I mention that word enthusiastically, right? Because people are always like, oh, I would rehire everybody. Would you enthusiastically? Enthusiastically? Yes. And suddenly you have your answer. Okay. So what we do in here is we learn to classify all the members on the team. We assess their strengths and weaknesses and fit with your core values. Okay. We look at their job performance and plot them out. And there's a way to do that, to kind of figure out where they are. It's an analog scale that can be all over the place. We start to put the puzzle pieces together to help everybody achieve more. But then if we've got some people that really don't have the potential, aren't ever going to be champion players, then we have to take action on that as well. So this sets you up to be able to continue to work on yourself and become the coach you want to as well, and the one that you wish you had all the way along on your journey. Any questions about that? Oh, I want to mention, there's a reason the New Zealand All Blacks are the team here, okay? They have a pretty strong set of core values that they've stuck to for a long time. They run their team according to those values, and they have a very strong culture. They are a country the size of Phoenix, okay? Roughly the same population. Yet, since 1906, they are the winningest team in international sports competition.
Wow.
They have a 77% win rate since 1906. All right? They're doing something right. You can't win all the time. You can't beat everybody. But for a country the size of Phoenix, Arizona, to have won international rugby competitions, all their international matches, 77% of the time for over a century, that's a group worth looking at, learning more about. Okay. Once you've established that, and once you've kind of figured out what those folks look like, hoping you're not just down to a couple players, but we know that maybe a couple need to be cut, or maybe as we start to add people, we want to make sure we're getting that same caliber of player on our team. We work on a clear system, a robust and repeatable system to recruit and hire more championship players. Okay, once we know what the attributes and the definition of our A player is, and by the way, your A player, your championship player, is going to be different from everybody else, because a big component of that is alignment with and behaviors aligned with your core values. And your core values, by definition, are yours. They're unique. So we're not all competing for the same top players, okay? There may be people who have a great skill set, but they're not a fit in your culture with your team, and that's okay, right? But we're going to learn how to attract more of them. Okay, that's recruiting, which recruiting function is basically marketing. Okay, generating leads. You're going to learn to implement a proven hiring process to close the ones that you want. That's your sales process. And then you implement a clear and thorough, this is the last one, induction process, okay, to bring them on board and train them in an organized and consistent way. And if you don't currently have an induction process, don't feel bad. The first time I was asked about our induction process, my answer was, what's an induction process, right? So we want to be able to onboard these people. The cool thing about that is having a good, solid induction process. And by the way, the ones that we design are about 3 to 4 weeks long. There's no 90-day probationary period. Okay, there's no 6-month review. We don't want bad players affecting your brand and your company negatively for that long. Okay, and even with the best processes in the world, when you follow top grading with all the resources of a General Electric, GE, they get it right about 80% of the time. That still means 1 in 5 people, and our experience is probably about 1 in 4, 75%, 75% of the time, are going to get through who don't belong there. And we need to catch them and know that early on, and exit them gracefully before they do a bunch of damage to the brand. Okay, so your induction process provides structure. It gives you enormous credibility with new hires because you appear organized. It engages other members of the team, but it also acts as that safety net to catch the few bad apples that are going to get through. Okay, and if you think about that, there are people who are just good at interviewing, people who say the right things. There are people who kind of trick you, and then they get in there and you're like, whoa, wait a minute, what do we do? And it may not have been a mistake on your part, but you've got to have a safety net at the end to catch them. Okay, so those are the 12 basic pillars. And once you've gone through and done these, you have a real running start on whatever the future might hold. Any questions before we move on? Good?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so these are a few advanced pillars. This is stuff that you can continue on and do after, or that if you're, super motivated and get things dialed in, or have already done part of others and you can check them off, you can do these interspersed with the 12 pillars. But kind of an advanced marketing pillar is the customer acquisition cost. Being able to calculate this and look at it and project it for different activities will allow you to screen and look at and assess different types of marketing, okay, and sales processes. So if you have a system where the profit on a customer or case is $100, and our customer acquisition cost that these folks are pitching to you and you're looking at looks like it's going to be $250, does that make sense? Right? We don't want to go by rule of thumb and what everybody tells you they're supposed to do, because if you're spending 10% on customer acquisition cost on your marketing and that effort, and you have a 15% profit before that, you're using 2/3 of your profit on your new marketing. We don't want to do that. Okay, we want efficient ways to do our marketing. We also go into tech tools to improve everything. So basically being able to automate and make stuff easier, streamline and smooth things out. For my clients, I'm also doing professional development, transformational growth trainings about quarterly for their key employees and staff. Because in the world I'm in, for most of my clients in healthcare, there really isn't much in the way of professional development, right? We add more clinical training, and we don't move people through the 5 levels, and they don't learn how to see themselves, or even if there's a need or desire to start to reimagine and reinvent their own identities and their own selves in that, where we see that very, very clearly in much of the business world. So someone moves into a management position, they get coaching, they get professional development training, they start to transform their own identity and their own view of themselves. They move into a director position, same thing. A VP, same thing. C-level, same thing. They realize that there are these transformations that they go through. And yet in our world, in the healthcare world, we really don't do very much of that. Number 4 is decision matrices. So we kind of touched on the beginnings of that with your vision, making sure that you check all those boxes. The next question after that for my decision matrix is, does it serve our target customer? Okay, and then we've got additional questions to start to make your decision processes and all easier, more straightforward, and also more transparent, so that people in your organization know what the criteria are and they don't come and bother you with a whole bunch of stuff that isn't going to work. And then finally, the practice. So remember the playbook that we started with? If you're not practicing on each other, then you're practicing on your patients and customers. And just think about a coach and what you would think of a coach who took their team, didn't do any practices, and sent them out on the field to play a game, to then just kind of, we'll see what happens. So we've got to incorporate this into our process. We create a process around this so that your people can make mistakes in a safe way, make mistakes that don't hurt you, and that foster continual development among your team members. Okay. So let's circle back and finish that idea of the horses versus tanks. So this is kind of the big lesson. If we're going to go out into the world and try to go back, especially right now, to what was before, that may not work. Okay. On the left here, you have the Polish cavalry. They, largely out of necessity, because they didn't have the equipment, tried to face the Nazis in 1939. In response to the Blitzkrieg, they attacked a Nazi tank group that was on break, and they had a very short-lived victory. They caught them eating and resting, and they beat them outside the tanks. The counterattack that came decimated them. And then we all know that their country was occupied for the ensuing 6 years and wrought just unimaginable devastation. Conversely, the U.S. had the advantage of not being in the war and being able to watch and see what was going on for a long time, which allowed a lot better preparation. Again, the U.S. Armored Division landed in Normandy on Omaha Beach on June 9th, 1944. By May 7th, 1945, the surrender was signed in Berlin. So instead of years of devastation and occupation, it was 11 months to move through France, Belgium, Germany, and defeat the Nazi army. So what would have happened if the 2nd Armored Division had instead been the 2nd Cavalry? How would they have fared on foot and horseback? And what would the world look like? So as you think about what's next for you and your business, are you taking care of and hanging onto your horse? Or are you getting ready for the way things are going to be in the future? Okay. And this is why I created the Focus Forward programs, okay, to help you get your current house in order, to boldly move into the future and be able to do that. So get your business, your time, your team aligned, create some freedom for yourself, and get ready to focus on and recreate your future. So if you want, you know, again, the biggest thing here is to get started. You gotta take action. So to commit to yourself, your business, your future, we can set up a starter session. We commit to your tanks, okay? We'll figure out and start outlining what your Focus Forward plan is to help you be successful in the future. You'll decide where you need to focus for your business in order to succeed. So it doesn't cost you anything. You will need to do some work, okay, to prepare and to follow through. You know, that's a running theme now too, right? You got to do stuff. You got to work hard. So what we do is we define where you want to go. We help you to be successful in the future, figure out what level you're currently at, decide on your first focus, start outlining your Focus Forward plan, and share options of where you might want to go from there. Okay, it does cost effort, but it doesn't cost any money. And if you want to do that, you can grab that bit.ly, schedule a sturdy URL, and set up our first conversation just to see if that's even a fit for you. So I'm not going to pitch and hard sell or anything like that. It's really a matter of if there's an opportunity to work together, that it's a partnership that you got to be committed to. You know, again, it's about doing. So what are your guys' thoughts? What questions do you have? How are you going to make this work in your business?
You make it sound so easy. I mean, I know it's not, and I know you know that it's not, but I just think about how, I guess I look at it and I get overwhelmed by the obstacles, and that's maybe where having a conversation where we just, identify the beginning is going to be the best effort.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. And what I'm striving to do here is simplify, okay? Create a path based on not just my experiences, but learnings, implementation, working with clients over the past 4 years, and then working with others before that through EO and mentorship and all kinds of things. But, taking those things and creating some structure, and this took, this took a while to organize and figure out, okay, what's the sequencing, what works best, what's going to happen. But these ultimately are the component parts that consistently lead people to, to the future, to success. It's not easy. Okay, you'll hear that I said I've tried to simplify it. It's simple, straightforward, at least that's my hope, but it's definitely not easy. It takes work.
Mm-hmm.
The other option, though, is to kind of go back and hope for the best. And I just don't want anybody to end up, like Blockbuster or Sears or, Blackberry, because they were afraid to move forward.
Sounds like I have a lot of talking to do with the management team. A lot.
Yeah. But, that's also why these are parsed out into monthly modules, because it takes time.
Yeah.
If it was enough to read the book and know what to do, then that would be it. You can go do that. We are teaching. This isn't pure coaching. There's a whole thing in the coaching world about like, oh, well, you're not just coaching, because coaching is this just asking questions and you don't give them anything. And I'm like, well, I understand that, but there are best practices out there, and why should you have to reinvent the wheel? There are things that work. So we're going to kind of meld that with what you're already doing, look at those things together, make sure that you understand and have the tools that you need. But then it's really the implementation pieces where the rubber meets the road. You got to implement and adapt it to your business. And I'm kind of fascinated and in love with that idea of the mass customization, because the principles are all there. There is a way to do it, but it's got to be customized and implemented and fit, your situation, your context, your business.
Right.
And there are details on every one of those that are going to be different for every single business. And that's okay. That's actually desirable. You don't want to be a penguin. You don't want to be the same as everybody else. But we also don't want to bury our heads in the sand and kind of hope for the best. I don't want you to be the Blackberry CEO saying, "Oh, we're going to be okay."
Right.
Now if you're the Apple people going, "Hey, we just created this new thing and we're going to be okay," that's totally different.
Yeah.
Right?
It's like one of those things where you don't know what you don't know. It's like, am I Apple or am I the Blackberry right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's one of the things we figure out. So if you guys want to, do that, you're more than welcome to go ahead and book a time. Let's, start having that conversation, explore it. Again, when I'm working with people, it's a partnership. It's a true partnership. I know a lot of people kind of pay lip service to that, but you gotta be motivated. You gotta be ready. You gotta want to move forward. If you don't, it's like having a patient that doesn't really know what you're going to do, or doesn't really want to work hard, or wants just it done for them. It doesn't work that way.
Mm-hmm.
Make sense?
Yes.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. Any other questions? Anything else?
Will you be sending us like an email of the links that you were talking about to start when the starter sessions with you, or like
Sure.
more information on that possibly.
Yeah, sure. No problem. The other thing I'm hoping to do is be able to continue to present this to other groups, to find business groups and owners, because especially right now, there's so many businesses shutting down, struggling, trying to figure out what's next for them, and really don't have a clear direction, don't know what they're going to do next. And that it's frightening, not just for them, but it's incredibly frustrating too for me. Like, there are things that many of them could do to, call it pivot, call it whatever, but to better succeed, to preserve their livelihood, to preserve the jobs, to do all that stuff. And that's, so if you know of any groups or organizations or what have you that could benefit, I would love to present to them as well.
Okay.
Cool. Well, let me know. I'll send you guys the link. Let me know if there's anything else that you need or could help you with. And look forward to talking more with you.
Cool.
Sounds great. Thanks, Dirty.
Thanks, Minnie.
Thanks,
Thanks, Jeremiah. All right. Y'all take care.
See ya.